The Federal Reserve has raised rates one time in the last decade, and even that was nothing more than saving face after countless failed promises. Every Fed meeting brings abundant speculation and anticipation of change in interest rates. Over and over again, worries dissipate as these bankers take no action. You came here for the truth, so let me unveil that for you. So yet another Fed meeting, and what we have is more of the same. All talk and no action. But what they did say, what they did promise, is that rates will be raised in 2016. Let's get into it right away as you look at this article out of CNN, but it's everywhere. Yellen was vague on timing. The Fed's committee next meets in late September. So what they're saying is, look, we're not going to raise rates now, okay? But by September, everything's going to be just fine. We will increase interest rates then. But it immediately then squashes that down and said, there's also a meeting in early November. However, it's unlikely that the Fed would raise rates right before the U.S. elections. Between September and November, there's no difference. They do not want to make any changes unless they're doing this intentionally before the election, because obviously as soon as they increase interest rates, where do you think the stock market will head? That's right. Plus, such ambiguity from Yellen may indicate that the Fed will wait until its meeting in December to raise rates. Of course, it's not going to happen at any of these times, most likely. And if it does, it will be such a fraction of a percentage point that it is insignificant. After all, Yellen said that in May that the rate increase would be appropriate over the summer months. There you go, another lie. She then changed course with the May jobs report. It was shockingly weak. No, it wasn't. Now she's giving no time reference. So here we go. And as it flips back and forth, you can see it all. The job market bounced back in June and July. No, it didn't. Adding over 500,000 jobs. That's completely fake. In that period, Yellen highlighted the jobs market improvement and solid growth, not true, in consumer spending. That's the best one. Because if, for example, you have to buy certain things as a requirement even, whether it's Obamacare, they add that to the GDP, and suddenly consumers are spending more. Well, it's not their fault. Sometimes they don't have a choice. Look, the amount of debt that consumers have, that personal debt, has never been this high historically, on average, of course. This is near the highest it's ever been. So, what does that tell you about people's ability to buy? Is that, look, they'll probably buy more if they can take on more debt, but they physically can't take on any more. They're trying. There will be new methods, I'm sure, that they will find, whether it's line of credits, whether it's credit cards, whether it's loans or anything like this. They're trying for more, I assure you. However, they're maxed out in many, many cases. And look at the student loan debt. That's in the trillions of dollars. I mean, it's ridiculous. But of course, they just keep highlighting these minute and minuscule amounts of changes that occur. Forget about the fact that, the stock market could have dropped 99%. But if it comes up 1%, they'll mention that. They'll talk about how percentage-wise this has done so well over this 3-month period, over this 1-week period, whatever. And they just have to ignore all that other bad news. Of course, that's exactly what it is bad news, and they do not want to have that spooking people. All right, quickly here. Now, what the Federal Reserve does, instead of taking action, is they use a policy, and this is not my wording, this is forward guidance. Now, the Federal Reserve has generally what I've always said is they have 2 bullets in their gun, and that is interest rates and money printing. They have 2 things that they can take action on. But they also have another one that is very stupid, and it is called forward guidance. And that is literally saying that they will increase interest rates, they will decrease interest rates, they will print money or they won't print money. And that there is a policy tool. I'm not joking. If you want to read it, it's right from the federalreserve.gov website, where they say that we can move markets by our words. And they do. You don't even need to see it on their own website. But look at it here. They literally say that, and they use all their jargon and things anyway, but it doesn't matter, because they actually say that we have this policy tool. It's called forward guidance, and that's what we use to actually manipulate markets and try to instill a sense of security and safety in the markets. What a joke. All right. Now, for a little bit of humor here, I try to make it light. I try to make it fun. The GDP expanded at 1.1%. That's right. See, let's not look at reality. Let's call the GDP expanding. Let's say that it's at 1.1%, even though we know that it is most likely in the negatives at this point. It's hard to calculate something, and even many make the argument that GDP isn't a very accurate number anyway, so let's not look at it. But it's fun. It's fun just to look at this number, and it's one of about 1,000 indicators that you can use in order to see what's happening. If you just take the GDP as a sense of, is the economy doing well, yes or no, then of course, no, it's a terrible indicator of that. But, to see it with 500 other indicators, sure, it does tell you something. And the fact that, it's even at their own numbers of 1.1%, it is a joke. Now, this right here is another joke, actually. It's the GDP Now statistic out of the Fed Atlanta. And what we are seeing here is 2016 quarter 3. They're estimating where this will go. And look at the range. Imagine that, 3.5%. They can't even shake 1%, even with all their manipulation, even with all their schemes and scams. 3.5%, what a joke. It's not going to be that. The only time it touched anywhere near there when it hit 5% for one quarter, and that was because people were suffering under the introduction of Obamacare, and people had to pay a lot for this so-called healthcare plan. Now, all I wanted to say was that look at these numbers, take them with a grain of salt, and never take a government number just for the way it is. You need to use that one and 500 more. All right. Last but not least, Chinese companies, Chinese individuals, and even state-owned enterprises are purchasing land, businesses all around the world. One major place, in fact, is in LA. This article is out of the LA Times, and what we can see is in this graphic here, some of the places that they are really doing a lot of work to. So this becomes multi-billion-dollar projects that are occurring, and it is really changing the skyline of LA, and they're really changing everything here. This, in general, what I'll say is I think anybody should really be able to purchase as long as it's legal and lawful. However, what we're seeing here is the state-owned enterprises coming in and making purchases. Now, on the surface level, that could be okay. But what I would say is that it runs into a little bit of gray territory when you start getting into them, any other foreign country owning something that could in fact be detrimental to your own. Like, would you want to have them own, let's say, the police department, for example, or the army, for example? Well, of course not. You wouldn't want that. So then there's other things where they start owning lots of land, and they end up controlling farmland, and they end up having a lot of control over the resources of a particular country. Now, while everything is peaceful, everything is fine, generally not a problem. But as we have seen historically throughout the years, there's a lot of tension. There is a lot of rhetoric, and it goes beyond that and becomes hot sometimes. And you know what I'm talking about. So in those cases, we would have a very big problem. Let's say they controlled, all of the energy. They bought out all the energy companies, And everything just ran smoothly. Everything ran the way it was. But they started to fight against each other, the countries. Well, maybe they would just decide to shut off all energy. Suddenly, from the inside, legally and lawfully, they shut off all the energy. Well, that would be a big problem, obviously. And I'm just making an example. But think about that. That's all I wanted to note for this. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. Last but not least, if you found the video informative, I know you'll find my book, The Money GPS, even more informative. If you want to look through the book, definitely go over to Amazon. They have a look inside feature, which will allow you to flip through the pages of the book and see if you like it. Take care. You came here for the rant, so let me unveil that for you. All right, look at this. Think about this for a second. You have a lot of people out there who attempt to profit from the stock market. And I think that, someone should be able to do that should they choose to. However, what we see is that a lot of people who don't really know much or know one or two things, let's say, about the stock market, about those companies, start to get in and start to gamble. And this is a really big problem because a lot of people get hurt. JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs aren't going to get hurt by your investments, by your real failures or anything. These big companies, I just named those, but these big companies are going to profit either way. That's what they do. So you as an individual need to realize every time you put your money into these major corporations, you know what? It's funny because you see a lot of individuals out there, a lot in the alternative news, where they start bad-mouthing the whole agenda of the globalists. At the same time, they tell you to buy stocks of those companies. Now, it might be temporarily. You might hold that stock for a week or a month or whatever, but you're still funding that company and their operations. So would I buy into Monsanto thinking that tomorrow they are going to, their stock's going to be worth twice as much? No, I can't do that. I cannot buy into that. And that's what I want to make note. If you want to really fight against the globalists, you speak up about it. But at the same time, don't go and buying their products. You need to know who's behind that corn that you're eating, who's behind that bank that you bank with, who's behind that stock that you're purchasing. Think about that. Think about, you may own that one company, but what about the parent companies? Who owns them? Don't buy into anything that you do not approve of. Take care.